Private members' business. Consideration of motion M382 on the subject of religious freedom in the name of Mr. Shipley.
Mr. Shipley, seconded by Mr. Anderson, moves that in the opinion of the House, the government should A, continue to recognize as part of Canadian foreign policy that 1, everyone has the right to freedom of religion and conscience, including the freedom to change religion or belief, and the freedom to manifest religion or belief in teaching, worship, practice, and observance. 2, all acts of violence against religious groups should be condemned. 3, Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights be supported. 4, la valeur particulière des déclarations officielles du ministre des Affaires étrangères pour dénoncer les violations à la liberté de religion partout dans le monde doit être promue. 5A, l'engagement du Canada à l'égard de la création d'un bureau de la liberté de religion doit être utilisé pour aider à protéger les minorités religieuses et promouvoir le pluralisme essentiel au développement des sociétés libres et démocratiques. B, support 1, the opposition to laws that use defamation of religion and blasphemy both within states and internationally to persecute members of religious minorities. 2, reporting by Canadian missions abroad in responding to incidents of religious violence. 3, coordinated efforts to protect and promote religious freedom. 4, the maintaining of a regular dialogue with relevant governments to ensure that the issue of religious persecution is a priority. 5, the encouragement of Canadian embassies to seek contact with religious communities and human rights organizations on gathering information related to human rights abuses. And 6, the training and support of foreign affairs officials for the advocacy of global religious freedom. Debate, the Honourable Member for Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a privilege for me today to rise and begin the first hour of debate on my private member's motion M382, which speaks to Canada's role to protect and promote the freedom of religion and conscience. Mr. Speaker, in my riding of Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, my constituents are appalled when they too often hear and see the persecution of people, the beating, the rape, and the killing of individuals. Why? Only because their religion, belief, or their desire to change it. This is, in fact, an issue of human dignity. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me to read again into the record my motion M382. That in the opinion of the House, the government should continue to recognize as part of Canadian foreign policy that everyone has the right to freedom of religion and conscience, including the freedom to change religion or belief, and the freedom to manifest religion or belief in teaching, worship, practice, and observance, and that all acts of violence against religious groups should be condemned, that Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights be supported, and the special value of official statements made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs denouncing violations of religious freedom around the world be promoted. Also, that Canada's commitment to the creation of the Office of Religious Freedom should be used to help protect religious minorities and promote the pluralism that is essential to the development of free and democratic societies, and support the opposition to the laws that use defamation of religion and blasphemy, both within states and internationally, to persecute members of religious minorities, and the reporting by Canadian missions abroad in responding to incidents of religious violence, as well as coordinated efforts to protect and promote religious freedom. and maintaining of a regular dialogue with relevant governments to ensure that the issues of religious persecution is a priority. Also, the encouragement of Canadian embassies to seek contact with religious communities and the human rights organizations on gathering information related to human rights abuses. And finally, and importantly, the training and the support of foreign affairs officials for advocacy of global religious freedom. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity now to thank my friend and my colleague, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and the member of Cypress Hills Grassland, Saskatchewan, for seconding this motion. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we are here today in part because of his commitment to this important and timely issue, and I'm pleased to have worked closely with him in bringing this motion forward. As I begin, please allow me to address the first part of my motion dealing with the importance of promoting religious freedom in our foreign policy and our government's intention to continue to speak out against discrimination and all acts of violence against religious groups. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, this human right is facing increasing restrictions worldwide. Our government is strong and a committed supporter of the individual rights of freedom of religion or belief, and we will continue to promote the protection of religious minorities around the world and support pluralism as a key objective of our foreign policy. Clearly, the need is urgent, and as the Prime Minister recently stated, as citizens of a free country, we have a solemn duty to speak out on behalf of those who are under constant threat. Why? Just because of their religious beliefs. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also correctly stated that democracy will not and cannot find fertile ground in any society where notions of the freedom of personal conscience and faith are not permitted. Mr. Speaker, in Canada, we have promoted and enacted human rights for a very long time. The right to religion in Canada is foundational, just as democracy is a fundamental right in Canada. Recently, I had the honor of joining the Prime Minister as he announced the official opening of our office, the government's Office of Religious Freedom. This office will be an important vehicle through which Canada will advance fundamental Canadian values, including freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law worldwide. It will focus on protecting and advocating on behalf of religious minorities under threat, opposing religious hatred and intolerance, and promoting Canadian values of pluralism and tolerance abroad. This includes when governments use laws of blasphemy, apostasy, and defamation of religion to restrict religious freedom and expression. Through this dedicated office, under the leadership of Dr. Andrew Bennett, Canada's first ambassador of religious freedom, we will coordinate diplomatic efforts to respond to areas of religious discrimination and persecution and maintain frank dialogue with other governments to ensure that religious freedom is in fact a priority. Mr. Speaker, last week I met with Ambassador Bennett and I congratulate him on his appointment, and I wish him every success in a position that surely will come with its challenges. Mr. Speaker, when considering this issue and this motion, it is useful to reflect on the original meaning of the word religion. In Latin, the word religion means respect for what is sacred. This is key to our approach. Respect for religious beliefs, for the ability to worship in safe and secure environment, and for the expression of one's faith free from persecution. We believe strongly that everyone should have this right. And as my motion M382 makes clear, our government will continue to speak out against and condemn all acts of violence against religious groups. Freedom of religion also means the freedom to change religion or belief, and the freedom to follow one's religion or belief in teaching, in worship, in practice, and observance, free from discrimination, free from fear of violence, and free from persecution. Mr. Speaker, we know there are strong linkages between religious freedom, pluralism, peace, and security. These which are pillars of strong democratic and prosperous development. As the Prime Minister has said, pluralism is a principle that binds our diverse peoples together. It is essential to our civil society and economic strength. Most of the world's nations are, like Canada, composed of diverse ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and religious populations. And this allows individuals to retain their cultural, linguistic, and religious heritage within a framework of shared citizenship. Canadians, like those of my riding of Lambton-Kent Middlesex, want us to take a strong and principled stand against religious persecution, particularly relevant to these recent years, a time when restrictions on religion freedom are on the rise worldwide. A Pew Forum study has found that one-third of the countries in the world have high or very high restrictions on the freedom of religion. As the restrictive countries are very populous, this means that nearly 70% of the world's population live in countries with high restrictions. The world needs leadership, and we are willing to stand with our partners to promote fundamental human rights. Simply put, societies that protect religious freedoms are most likely to protect other fundamental freedoms. They are typically more stable and more prosperous. When you have religious freedom, other freedoms follow. That is why religious freedom is prominently found in documents such as the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Mr. Speaker, Canada will continue to be strong and a committed supporter of the individual rights of freedom of religion and conscience, pursued in conjunction with other civil and political rights. The right of the individual of freedom of religion is enshrined in Articles 2 and 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as Articles 18, 24, and 26 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. In addition, our own Canadian Constitution enshrines, and I quote, the freedom of conscience and religion as a fundamental freedom. Mr. Speaker, Canada has an important role to play globally, a role from which we will not shy away. Canada is a country of tolerance, acceptance, peace, and security. Canada is a country of tolerance and peace and security, and we are also a pluralistic society. Our diversity gives us a unique perspective on the world. Canada has long been building the conditions in which people live with the dignity others wish for, built around our fundamental values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. For example, these fundamental values were ripped away from someone we all know of, Shahbaz Bhatti, an upright appointed Minister for Minorities in Pakistan, but who was gunned down and assassinated last year. Why? Because of his beliefs and working and advocating for the dignity of all. Mr. Speaker, Canada, by its very nature and our history, is well positioned to promote freedom of religion and belief. At the time of Confederation, the neutrality of the Canadian state towards citizens' choice of faith and belief was affirmed in the British North American Act in 1867. In the early period of the 20th century, tolerance for religious minorities was entrenched by way of several court decisions, protecting, for example, the rights of Jews and Jehovah's Witnesses. Later in the second half of the century, respect for social diversity was reasserted in an emergent culture of human rights, as reflected in the Canadian Bill of Rights, adopted by the Diefenbaker government in 1960, and then again in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, 1982. On the day Prime Minister John Diefenbaker introduced the Canadian Bill of Rights in Parliament, he spoke these words: "I am a Canadian, free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand up for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, and free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and all mankind." Mr. Speaker, today, that great challenge, that great responsibility is shared by myself, my colleagues, and indeed, I believe, all who sit in this chamber. And it is important that we take this seriously. Mr. Speaker, to conclude, I am pleased to present this motion for debate, and I hope that it will enjoy support from all parties and all members. I believe that it is entirely compatible with our values and our beliefs as Canadians, and it clearly demonstrates Canada's duty to promote religious freedom on behalf of the high number of individuals and groups around the world facing discrimination, persecution, and oppression. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank very much my honourable colleague, the member from Lambton Kent Middlesex, for his very stirring speech. I know that this is an issue that's very close to his heart, and I think that he is to be commended for bringing this very important motion forward before this House. This is a core Canadian value, and he has said it very well. His speech was thought out. I thought he spoke from the heart. I'd like to ask him if he can give us a flavor of what he thinks the current state of religious freedoms is around the world. Does he see things improving on an annual basis? Does he see things deteriorating? Maybe he could give us a little example of what he has seen happen over the last few years and tell us why he thinks Canada needs to stand up for this most fundamental human right.
The Honourable Member for Lambton Kent Middlesex.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Parliamentary Secretary to Foreign Affairs for his kind comments, but also for the amount of work that I know that he's done and has been a part of getting the Office of Religious Freedom up and going. And so I thank you for that. And I also thank you for the question. As I mentioned in the start of my speech, when you read the news and you see the atrocities that are happening around the world, you know, it's easy when they're a few thousand miles away at one time, you would sort of put them behind you, I guess, because by the time you received the news, it was old news. When these atrocities, Mr. Speaker, happen now, they are instant. They are on our doorstep. They are on our digital stuff that we have that surrounds us every day. And so, as a father and a grandfather, when I see these things happening, and I have a note, and I may get a chance of what has happened in one in Bangladesh, for example, but the continual extreme organizations that don't have a conscience for human life seem to be on the uprise. And I think Canada is a country, and I'm so proud to be Canadian, as all of us are here, that I believe that Canada is a country that has the opportunity, because of where it is held in esteem around the world, to be one of those leaders, to build our partnerships with other countries, to have some influence to help persuade and to bring back some of this problem that's out there.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for Lambton Kent Middlesex. I don't doubt for a moment the sincerity of the words we heard from you here today. I've seen you enough times in this House. And I'm heartened to hear the amount of times in your remarks that you referred to the United Nations and the various protocols, because there's back and forth that occurs here in this place, and at times on this side we've questioned the commitment to the United Nations of this government. And to hear you talk about Mr. Mbadi, I'm Vice Chair of the Subcommittee on Human Rights, and we had Mr. Mbadi before us, and he quite clearly told us that he was at risk for his beliefs, and he ultimately died as a result of that, and I want to echo your thoughts on that. But again, it's more of a commentary than it is a question. It's the evolution of the relationship, or what could be perceived as a deterioration of the relationship between the Conservative government and the United Nations. And hopefully this is a sign that perhaps we may have misjudged. It's possible.
The honourable member for Lambton Kent Middlesex.
Thank you, and I very much appreciate it. I know the member next that answered that question, and I'm sorry I don't have your writing, but I've known him for a while, and I know his comments to be sincere, and I thank you for those. I think when you look as a nation of how you're going to approach, you look at declarations of not only the United Nations, but there's also the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the United States of America, Germany has theirs, the EU, the United Kingdom. And so when I talked about building, this isn't about just Canada. It's about bringing along those partners that are there. And as I mentioned in my speech, when you enter in a democracy and when you allow the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion and expression to happen, those countries are strong and they are democratic, and they're the ones that will prosper in the end. And so we come alongside and build the partnerships with these countries. And so I'm glad to hear from the member that I'm hoping that he would be supporting this motion, and I thank him for his question.
Resume.